The trader's bazaar on Velix Prime sprawled across 3 square kilometers of covered marketplace, a testament to commercial ambition and questionable urban planning. Marcus Webb navigated through crowds of dozens of species, each conducting business in their own language, creating a cacophony that his translator implant struggled to parse into coherent information. He wasn't supposed to be here. His day off from cargo inspection should have been spent catching up on sleep or finally fixing the broken climate control in his apartment. But sleep had been elusive lately, and his apartment felt simultaneously too small and too empty. So he'd come to the bazaar, browsing goods he couldn't afford and people watching in the way that made his loneliness slightly less obvious. Near the eastern edge of the market, where legitimate commerce gave way to more questionable transactions, a commotion drew his attention. A Keltheran merchant, tall, with mottled green skin and ears that swept back from his skull in elaborate curves, was gesturing dramatically at something near his stall. "Defective stock," the merchant announced in accented common standard. "Consuming resources, producing nothing. Take them, they're useless and free." Marcus moved closer, curiosity overriding his usual instinct to avoid drama. The crowd parted enough for him to see what the merchant was advertising. 5 small figures huddled together on the ground. Children, young Keltherans with dull, patchy skin that should have been vibrant green, their large eyes reflecting fear and a resignation that made Marcus's chest tighten. "What's wrong with them?" someone in the crowd asked, more curious than concerned. The merchant, his name badge identified him as Voreth, gestured dismissively. "Offspring of dead slaves, too weak for labor, too flawed for proper families. Genetic dead ends, all of them. They eat, they sleep, they take up space, worthless parasites." Most of the crowd had already lost interest, moving toward stalls with actual merchandise. A few lingered to make cruel jokes about Keltheran breeding standards. Marcus found himself moving forward before his conscious mind caught up with his body. "You're serious?" he asked. "You're giving away children." Voreth's ears twitched, amusement or contempt Marcus couldn't tell. "A human, how appropriate. Your species is known for strange sentimentality." He gestured at the children. "Yes, I am serious. Their parents defaulted on debts. The offspring became collateral, then liability. I have attempted to place them in labor programs, adoption networks, even charitable institutions. No one wants them. They are too weak, too slow, too defective." The oldest child, a girl maybe 10 in human years, pulled the younger ones closer, her eyes meeting Marcus's with a mix of defiance and desperate hope. "What happens to them if no one takes them?" Marcus heard himself ask. Voreth shrugged. "They become the state's problem, processing centers. Minimal care until they reach working age, then assignment to whatever undesirable labor needs bodies, if they survive that long." His tone suggested survival was not guaranteed. Marcus looked at the children again. 5 kids whose only crime was being born to the wrong parents, in the wrong financial situation, in a society that measured worth in economic terms. He'd been one of those kids once. Not alien, not on another planet, but definitely unwanted. He remembered social workers with tired eyes telling him, "You're a difficult placement, Marcus," in tones that really meant, "You're too much trouble to care about." "I'll take them," he said. The crowd noise around them seemed to pause, though Marcus knew that was probably his imagination. Voreth's ears flattened against his skull, definite surprise. "You, what?" "I'll take them, all 5. You said they're free, right?" "Yes, but—" Voreth recovered quickly, his commercial instincts overriding confusion. "You understand this is a legal transfer of responsibility. You will be liable for their care, their behavior, their debts if they incur any." "I understand. And you have appropriate housing. Keltherans require specific environmental conditions." "I'll figure it out." Voreth studied Marcus with an expression that suggested he was trying to determine if this was some elaborate joke. Then his mercenary nature won out over skepticism. "Very well. We will process the documentation immediately. The paperwork took 45 minutes. Marcus provided his identification, proof of employment, residential address. Voreth processed everything with bureaucratic efficiency, clearly eager to resolve this situation before the human changed his mind. When the final authorization appeared on Marcus's datapad, 5 names he couldn't pronounce attached to his legal responsibility, Voreth made a gesture that might have been a blessing or might have been, "You're an idiot." "They are yours now," he said. "May you find more value in them than I did." Marcus approached the children slowly, very aware that he probably looked like just another threat in a life full of them. The oldest girl positioned herself in front of the others, her body language screaming protection despite her obvious fear. "Hey," Marcus said softly, crouching to be less imposing. "My name is Marcus. I know you don't know me, and I know this is terrifying, but you're safe now. I'm going to take you somewhere warm and quiet, and we'll figure everything else out from there. Okay." The girl stared at him, processing. Then she said something in Keltheran that his translator rendered as, "Why would you do this?" Marcus didn't have a good answer. "Because someone should," he said finally. "Because you deserve better than this." She studied him for a long moment, then made a decision. She stood, helped the younger children to their feet, and gestured that they would follow him. The walk back to his apartment took 30 minutes through streets that suddenly felt different. Marcus was acutely aware of the stares, the whispers, the way other Keltharans looked at him with expressions ranging from confusion to disgust. He'd adopted 5 children on impulse. 5 alien children he knew nothing about, who spoke a language he barely understood, whose cultural needs he couldn't begin to guess. He'd probably just made the worst decision of his life. But when he looked back and saw the oldest girl holding the smallest child's hand, guiding her siblings through unfamiliar streets toward an uncertain future that at least wasn't a processing center, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. They reached his building, a modest residential complex in the Human District, and climbed the stairs to his 3rd-floor apartment. Marcus opened the door to his tiny living space and had the sudden horrifying realization that it was designed for 1 person, not 6. The children filed in cautiously, scanning for threats, assessing exits. They clustered together in the corner farthest from the door, watching Marcus with the wary calculation of prey animals. "Right," Marcus said, trying to project calm confidence he absolutely didn't feel. "So this is home now. It's not big, but it's safe, and we'll make it work." The oldest girl said something to the others in rapid Keltharan. They didn't relax, but the smallest one, barely more than a toddler, stopped crying. Marcus pulled out his datapad and started frantically researching Keltharan biology while 5 terrified children watched his every movement, and he tried not to think about how completely unprepared he was for this. Somewhere in the Keltharan district, word was beginning to spread. A human had taken the discarded children. Most considered it a bizarre curiosity. One grandmother heard the news with a mixture of hope and dread and began planning a visit that would change everything. The first night was a disaster in slow motion. Marcus discovered that Keltharans were primarily herbivorous after offering the children synthesized protein that they refused to touch with expressions suggesting he'd presented them with poison. His apartment's environmental controls could adjust humidity, but not quickly enough to prevent the children from developing respiratory distress that had Marcus panicking and searching for emergency medical protocols. The bedroom he'd offered them, his own bed, while he'd planned to sleep on the couch, went unused. The children refused to separate, instead huddling together in the living room corner on the floor despite his repeated assurances that beds were safer and more comfortable. By 300 hours, Marcus had given up on sleep and was deep in Keltharan cultural databases, learning that children from their species bonded intensely with siblings as a survival mechanism, that they communicated through gesture as much as speech, that their skin discoloration was likely from malnutrition rather than inherent defect. The oldest girl, He'd heard the others call her something like Liz, watched him work from her protective position. When their eyes met, she didn't look away, just assessed him with the careful attention of someone deciding whether to trust. "I'm trying to figure out what you need," Marcus said quietly, not sure if his translator was working properly. "Food, temperature, sleeping arrangements. I'm sorry I don't know already. I'm learning as fast as I can." Liz tilted her head, processing. Then she stood slowly, careful not to wake the younger ones, and approached Marcus's datapad. She pointed at the nutritional information displayed, then made a series of gestures. Marcus's translator struggled with the hand movements but eventually rendered, "Green plants, soft, not processed. They are afraid of processed food. Processed means institutional care." Understanding clicked into place. Of course they'd refuse anything that looked like institutional rations. "Okay, I can get fresh vegetables. There's a market 2 blocks from here that opens at dawn. I'll go as soon as it's light." Liz studied him, then made another gesture. "Why are you helping us?" "Because nobody else would," Marcus said. "And because that's not okay. Kids shouldn't be thrown away because they're not perfect." She didn't respond, just returned to her siblings. But something in her posture had shifted. Not trust exactly, but maybe the beginning of considering trust as a possibility. The market at dawn was less crowded than the bazaar. Marcus filled bags with leafy greens, root vegetables, things that looked edible and earth-like enough to be familiar. The vendor, a elderly Korthan, watched him select items with growing curiosity. "You have Keltheran guests?" she asked. "I have Keltheran kids," Marcus corrected. 5 of them, and I'm trying to figure out what they eat." The vendor's expression softened. "You are the human who took Vorath's discards." News traveled fast. "Yeah, that's me." She began adding items to his bags without asking, refusing payment. "These will help. Keltheran young need varied nutrition. The purple root's especially good for skin health." She paused. "What you did was foolish, but also kind. We need more foolish kindness in this world." Marcus returned to his apartment laden with bags that cost more than he'd planned to spend, but less than they should have thanks to the vendor's generosity. The children were awake, still clustered together, watching the door. He unpacked the food slowly, narrating what each item was. Liz translated for the others. When he'd arranged everything on the floor, plates felt too formal, too institutional. He backed away to give them space. They ate cautiously at first, then with increasing enthusiasm. The smallest one made happy sounds that needed no translation. That became the pattern. Marcus learned through trial and error, research and observation. He adjusted the apartment's humidity higher than was comfortable for him, but better for them. He rearranged furniture to create open floor space where they could cluster together. He learned their names by listening carefully. Liz 10, Kento 8, Myra and Saul 6-year-old twins, and Pip barely 4. He learned that Kento didn't speak, but communicated through gestures that Liz translated. That Myra and Saul operated as a single unit, never more than arm's length apart. That Pip had nightmares that involved screaming in languages Marcus's translator couldn't interpret. He learned that he drastically underestimated how much 5 children could complicate a previously simple life. His employer was surprisingly understanding. When Marcus explained, he needed flexible scheduling for family emergencies. His neighbor, a Tholian engineer who communicated through bioluminescent color changes, helped him install a proper air filtration system suited for Keltheran respiration. His bank account drained faster than he'd anticipated, but not disastrously. 6 weeks in, something shifted. Liz started responding to his questions with more than monosyllables. Kento began exploring the apartment instead of staying frozen in the corner. The twins discovered that Marcus's datapad could display educational games and became obsessed with spatial puzzles. Pip started calling him Marcus, with careful pronunciation that made his chest feel too tight. Marcus mentioned the progress to Veles, a Keltheran trade coordinator at his workplace who he'd never been particularly close with, but who at least seemed less hostile than most Keltharans when discussing the situation. "They're doing really well," Marcus said over lunch in the station cafeteria. "Liz is showing this amazing mechanical intuition. Yesterday she fixed my broken environmental controls just by looking at them for like 5 minutes. And Kento started talking. Turns out he can speak. He just didn't feel safe enough before. His vocabulary is incredible. The twins are solving spatial puzzles that I can't even figure out, and Pip remembers everything. Like everything. She can recite entire conversations from days ago word for word." Velis had gone very still, his eating utensils frozen halfway to his mouth. "Velis, you okay?" "Say that again," Velis said carefully. "About their abilities." Marcus repeated his observations, confused by the intensity of Velis's attention. "Marcus," Velis said slowly, "those aren't signs of developmental delays or genetic defects. Those are signs of specialized genetic markers, very old markers that most Keltharans consider extinct." "What do you mean?" Velis glanced around the cafeteria, then leaned closer. "Centuries ago, before my people became obsessed with commercial success and standardized capabilities, Keltharans had specialized lineages. Technicians who could understand machines intuitively. Seers who possessed perfect memory and pattern recognition. Coordinators with enhanced spatial reasoning. These traits were considered inefficient compared to generalized abilities, so they were systematically bred out over generations. But they didn't disappear. Recessive genetics rarely truly disappear. Occasionally, children are born carrying these ancient markers. They don't fit standard developmental profiles, so they're labeled defective and discarded before their actual abilities manifest." Velis looked genuinely troubled. "Marcus, you haven't adopted disabled children. You've adopted 5 potential prodigies carrying genetic markers that powerful families would kill to reclaim." Marcus felt the temperature drop despite the cafeteria's stable climate control. Kill to reclaim. Once it's known what they are capable of, families who previously rejected them will want them back. Those same families are often politically powerful and not accustomed to being denied. Velis met his eyes. "You need to be very careful. You've accidentally acquired something far more valuable than you realized." That evening, Marcus sat at his small kitchen table while the children played in the living room and tried to process what Velis had told him. He'd thought he was rescuing unwanted kids. Turned out he'd rescued potential prodigies whose abilities would make them targets. The door chimed. Marcus checked the security screen and saw an elderly Keltharan woman in formal robes standing in the corridor. He opened the door cautiously. "Can I help you?" The woman's ears swept back in formal respect. "I am Saris Vandal. I believe you are caring for my grandchildren." Marcus's hand tightened on the doorframe. "I didn't know they had family who cared. I was legally barred from contact when my son defaulted on his debts. In Keltharan society, family shame extends to all bloodline relations." Her voice carried weight of old pain. "But I have heard that a human took them in, that they are thriving. I needed to see if this was true." From the living room, Liss's voice called out in Keltharan a question. Saris's composure cracked slightly. "May I see them, please?" "I know I have no legal right, but—" "You're their grandmother," Marcus interrupted. "Of course you can see them." He stepped aside. Saris entered slowly, reverently, and when Liss emerged from the living room and recognized her, the girl's face transformed into something Marcus had never seen before. Pure joy. The reunion was conducted in rapid Keltharan that Marcus's translator couldn't keep pace with. The younger children emerged, tentative at first, then rushing forward when Liss confirmed this was family, safe family, someone who'd loved them when they were deemed unlovable. Marcus retreated to the kitchen, giving them privacy, and tried not to think about the fact that a grandmother who actually cared might have more right to these kids than he did. An hour later, Saris found him there. "Thank you," she said simply. "They are healthy, happy. I did not believe it possible. They're good kids, Marcus said. They just needed someone to give them a chance. You have done more than give them a chance. You have invoked the right of guardianship. When Marcus looked confused, she continued. In Keltheran culture, taking responsibility for bloodline offspring not your own, especially rejected ones, creates a sacred bond. You are now legally and spiritually their guardian. Your authority supers. Veles mentioned that. Then you understand the danger. There are families, noble families, who discarded bloodline years ago when those children showed signs of weakness. Now that word is spreading about your children's emerging abilities, those families are reconsidering. They will claim legal precedence over a human guardian. They will use every political tool available to take back what they once threw away. Can they do that legally? If you do not formally establish your guardianship before the High Council, yes. The right exists in our oldest laws, but it requires public acknowledgement to have full force. Saris's expression was grave. You must stand before the council and claim them formally. It will be dangerous. They will challenge you, but it is the only way to protect what you have built here. Will you help me? Marcus asked. If I support your guardianship publicly, I will be denouncing my own son's failures, and admitting a human is better suited to raise my grandchildren than any Keltheran. It will destroy what little social standing I have left. She paused, looking toward the living room where children's laughter echoed. Yes, I will help you, because they deserve a guardian who sees their worth, and you have proven yourself to be that guardian. Marcus stood, offering his hand in the human gesture of agreement. Sarah studied his hand for a moment, then grasped it firmly. Thank you, he said. Thank me after we survive what comes next, Saris replied. The council convenes in 3 weeks. We must prepare carefully. After she left, Marcus returned to the living room where 5 children were engaged in elaborate games that involved the twins building structures while Pip narrated rules and Kento provided running commentary, and Liz supervised with the focused intensity of a military commander. They looked up when he entered, and Liz asked in careful common standard, "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Marcus said, sitting down on the floor with them. "But I need to tell you something important. There's going to be a meeting with some Keltheran officials. They're going to ask questions about you living here with me. It might be uncomfortable, but I need you to know that no matter what they say, you're staying here. This is your home now. Okay?" "They will try to take us away," Liz said. "It wasn't a question. They'll try, but I won't let them, I promise." Pip climbed into his lap with the casual confidence of a child who decided he was safe. "You're Kelvaseth," she said seriously. "I don't know what that means." "It means one who sees clearly," Liz translated. "When others are blind, grandmother called you that." Marcus hugged Pip a little tighter and hoped he could live up to that label when it mattered most. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Saris visited daily, coaching Marcus on Keltheran legal protocols and council procedures. She explained that he would need to present his case formally, demonstrating not just his care for the children, but his understanding of their cultural needs and his commitment to honoring their heritage while providing opportunities their own society had denied them. "They will question your fitness," Saris warned. "Your understanding of our culture, your financial stability, your ability to provide appropriate guidance as they mature. You must be prepared to answer honestly but also strategically." Marcus spent his evenings after the children were asleep researching Keltheran history, cultural practices, educational approaches. He documented everything he'd done to accommodate their needs, dietary adjustments, environmental controls, the hybrid learning program he developed combining human and Keltheran educational resources. Work became complicated. His supervisor called him in for a conversation that was professionally polite but essentially hostile. "Marcus, we've received inquiries from Keltheran government officials about your fitness as an employee. Questions about your judgment, your priorities, your stability." The supervisor, A Martian colonial with no patience for drama, looked genuinely sympathetic. I want to be clear that your work performance has been exemplary. But this situation you've created is drawing attention we don't need. I took in 5 kids who needed help. That shouldn't be controversial. It shouldn't be, but it is. And I need to know that you're prepared for the consequences, because the company can't protect you from political pressure. I'm prepared, Marcus said, hoping it was true. His apartment landlord discovered sudden violations of occupancy limits. The building's management company sent formal notices about excessive environmental modifications and unauthorized residents. Saris helped him navigate the bureaucratic harassment with legal responses that bought time but couldn't eliminate the pressure. The Human Diplomatic Corps summoned him next. Ambassador Patricia Okoye received him in her office with the kind of forced courtesy that meant she was furious but had to be professional. "Mr. Webb, you've created an interesting situation." She gestured to a chair. "Sit. Let's discuss how you've managed to complicate human-Keltheran relations with what I can only describe as impulsive sentimentality." "I helped some kids. I didn't realize that was complicated." Everything is complicated when it crosses cultural boundaries and challenges established power structures. Okoye pulled up documents on her display. "The Keltheran government has formally requested that you transfer guardianship to appropriate authorities from their own species. They argue that a human cannot possibly provide proper cultural guidance, that these children need to be raised by their own people with understanding of their heritage. Their own people threw them away. That's not relevant to the diplomatic request. What is relevant is that you're creating friction between Earth and the Keltheran collective over 5 children who, with all due respect, are not your responsibility." "They are my responsibility. I made them my responsibility when I took them home." Okoye's expression suggested she was restraining herself with effort. "Mr. Webb, I'm going to be blunt. The Keltheran government wants these children back now that they understand their potential value. If you refuse to transfer guardianship voluntarily, they will pursue other means. Legal challenges, political pressure, possibly extra-legal solutions. We cannot protect you from all of that. The diplomatic cost would be too high. So you're telling me to give up. I'm telling you to be realistic. You're one person without significant resources or political capital. You're fighting an entire governmental system backed by powerful families with centuries of influence. The outcome is inevitable. The only question is how much damage you do to yourself and to Earth's diplomatic standing before you accept that." Marcus stood. "I appreciate the advice, Ambassador, but I'm not giving up. Those kids deserve someone who fights for them, even if the fight is impossible." "Then you're a fool," Okoye said, not unkindly. "But I suppose someone has to be. Just know that when this gets ugly, and it will get ugly, we will not intervene. You're on your own." The harassment escalated. Marcus returned home one evening to find his apartment ransacked. Nothing stolen, but personal items disturbed, drawers opened. A clear message that his space could be violated whenever they wanted. The children were terrified, and Liz admitted she'd heard Keltheran voices outside discussing retrieval protocols. Marcus installed better security, but they both knew it was largely symbolic. If someone really wanted to get in, they would. The visit from Counselor Dravik came on a Wednesday evening. Marcus answered the door to find a tall Keltheran in formal governmental robes, flanked by 2 assistants who radiated subtle threat. "Marcus Webb, I am Counselor Dravik from the Cultural Preservation Committee. May I come in?" Marcus wanted to refuse but didn't want to appear hostile before the council hearing. 5 minutes. Dravik entered, scanning the apartment with obvious distaste. Too small, too human, too inappropriate for Keltheran children. "I've come to discuss a reasonable compromise. You clearly care for these children, and that is commendable. But surely you understand that they need proper Keltheran education, socialization with their own kind, preparation for their eventual roles in our society. They're doing fine with the education they're getting. Are they? Can you teach them the histories, the proper gestures for formal occasions, the complex web of social obligation that governs our culture? Dravik's smile didn't reach his eyes. I propose a solution. You maintain nominal guardianship, while the children attend specialized Keltharian educational facilities. Best of both worlds. Would I have any say in their treatment at these facilities? You would be consulted. As appropriate for a guardian of your. Dravik paused deliberately. Background. The word hung in the air, loaded with meaning. Human outsider, not one of us. Get out, Marcus said quietly. Mr. Webb, I urge you to reconsider. Get out of my home. Dravik's expression hardened. You are making a serious mistake. There are processes, legal and otherwise, for handling situations like this. I am offering you a graceful resolution. Refuse it, and you will discover that our patience has limits. After Dravik left, Marcus found Liz standing in the hallway, having heard everything. He wants to separate us from you, she said. Put us in institutions. Use our abilities for their benefit. I know, but I won't let that happen. Marcus, she looked older than her years. You cannot fight all of them. They have power, resources, legal authority. You are one human trying to protect 5 Keltharian children against an entire system designed to reclaim us. Then the system needs to change, Marcus said firmly. And sometimes change starts with one person being stubborn enough to say no. Liz studied him with those 2 old eyes, then nodded. Kelvasith, she said quietly. One who sees clearly. I hope you're right. The night before the council hearing, Saris arrived at Marcus's apartment with formal robes for him, a human adaptation of Keltharian guardian dress that would signal his seriousness to the council. Tomorrow will be difficult, she said. They will attack your character, your fitness, your understanding. They will make you question whether you have any right to stand where you're standing. I know, and you're prepared. Marcus looked at the children, Liz helping the twins with their studies, Kento reading poetry aloud in beautiful cadence, Pip playing with building blocks and narrating an elaborate story. 5 kids who'd been thrown away, now thriving. 5 futures that shouldn't have existed. I'm prepared to tell the truth, he said. That I found 5 terrified kids being given away like garbage and I couldn't walk away. That they've proven everyone who called them worthless was catastrophically wrong. That they deserve advocates who see their potential instead of their flaws. If the council can't understand that, then the problem isn't with me, it's with them. Sarah smiled. Good, remember that conviction tomorrow, you'll need it. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He stood on his small balcony looking at Velix Prime's 3 moons and tried to prepare for a battle he had no training for against opponents with every advantage. Behind him, he heard soft footsteps. Liz joined him on the balcony. You're afraid, she observed. Terrified, Marcus admitted. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm completely out of my depth. You saved us. I helped you. You saved yourselves. No, Liz's voice was firm. We were dying, maybe not immediately, but slowly. We would have been processed through institutional systems until we broke or disappeared. You looked at us and saw people worth fighting for. That gave us permission to believe we were worth fighting for. Marcus didn't know what to say to that. Tomorrow, they will try to make you small, Liz continued. They will use legal language and cultural arguments and political pressure to convince you that you have no right to stand as our guardian. But you should know, all of us, even Pip who barely understands, we choose you. If they force us to leave, we will run away and find you again. Because you are Kelvasith, and we would rather have one human who sees clearly than 1,000 Keltharians who are blind. Marcus pulled her into a hug, this fierce, brilliant girl who'd become something like a daughter. Whatever happens tomorrow, you need to know that you've changed my life. All of you. I was just existing before, going through motions. You gave me a reason to be more than that. Good, Liz said, then we're even. The next morning, Marcus dressed in the formal robe Saris had provided, made sure the children had breakfast, and headed to the council chambers with the determination of someone who'd already decided the outcome was less important than the principle. The high council chambers were designed to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings, tiered seating for hundreds of observers, a raised platform where council members sat in judgment. Marcus stood at the supplicant's position, a small platform in the center where all attention focused, and tried not to feel like an insect under examination. Counselor Dravik presented the case against him with practiced efficiency. A human with no understanding of Keltheran culture had improperly assumed guardianship over children whose bloodline families wished to reclaim them now that their conditions were better understood. Marcus was accused of cultural theft, exploitation of desperate circumstances, preventing children from receiving proper Keltheran upbringing. These children possess rare genetic markers indicating specialized abilities, Dravik said. Abilities that require careful cultivation by experts in Keltheran developmental practices. Mr. Webb, with all respect to his intentions, cannot possibly provide the guidance they need. He cannot teach them our histories, our social codes, our cultural identity. He is, fundamentally, an outsider attempting to raise children who belong to our people. Other council members nodded. Marcus watched his chances of winning through legal argument evaporate. When Dravik finished, the council chair, an elderly Keltheran whose ears bore marks of extreme age and status, gestured to Marcus. "You may present your defense." Marcus stepped forward, abandoning the careful legal arguments he'd prepared. If he was going to lose, he'd lose honestly. "I don't have a fancy legal case," he said. "I can't cite cultural precedents or argue fine points of guardianship law. I can only tell you what happened. 2 months ago, I was walking through the Trader's Bazaar and heard a merchant advertising useless children for free. 5 kids who'd been labeled defective, whose own families had given up on them, who were going to be processed through institutional systems until they broke. I looked at them and saw terrified people who deserved better. So I took them home." He paused, scanning the council members. Some looked bored, some hostile. A few seemed genuinely curious. "The first night was a disaster. They huddled in my apartment corner, too afraid to sleep in beds. They wouldn't eat anything I offered because it looked like institutional food. I spent hours researching what they needed, adjusting my environment, learning their communication styles. And slowly, so slowly, they started to trust that maybe kindness wasn't a trap." "This is irrelevant sentiment," Dravik began. "It's the entire point," Marcus interrupted. "These kids were thrown away. Counselor Dravik, you personally rejected 2 children 15 years ago who likely carried the same genetic markers now manifesting in my wards. You decided they weren't worth the effort. And now that they're proving to have value, you want them back. No, that's not how this works." The chamber erupted. Dravik rose, furious. "You presume to lecture this council on our own cultural practices. To judge systems you cannot possibly understand. I'm not judging your systems. I'm judging the outcome. 5 brilliant, talented, wonderful kids were labeled worthless and discarded because they didn't fit your standard template. If that's what your systems produce, then yes, maybe they need examination. These children are Keltheran." Dravik's voice echoed. "Their gifts belong to our people. Their futures should be guided by their own kind. Their own kind left them to die." Marcus's response was equally loud. "I'm not their own kind. I don't know your histories or your cultural codes, but I looked at 5 kids and saw people worth caring about. If that's revolutionary in your culture, then maybe your culture has lost something essential." The argument continued, council members interjecting, legal points raised and dismissed. Marcus felt control of the situation slipping away until Saris Vandal rose from the family gallery. The breach of protocol drew shocked attention. Council observers weren't supposed to speak unless recognized. "I am Saris Vandal, bloodline grandmother to these children," she said in formal cadence. "By right of bloodline, I could claim guardianship. I do not. I recognize Marcus Webb's guardianship as valid and absolute under the right. He has honored these children when we did not. He has given them futures we denied them. If our laws have become so corrupted that this simple act of mercy is controversial, then we have forgotten the foundations on which those laws were built. Her declaration shifted the entire dynamic. A bloodline family member supporting a human guardian over her own claim was unprecedented. The council deliberated for 3 hours while Marcus waited in an antechamber, Saris beside him, both of them too nervous to speak. When they were summoned back, the council chair delivered the ruling. The High Council acknowledges Marcus Webb's guardianship as valid under ancient provisions of the right, subject to ongoing review to ensure appropriate care standards are maintained. This matter will be revisited annually. The children remain in his custody pending evidence of harm or negligence. It wasn't complete victory. The ongoing review clause left room for future challenges, but it was enough. They'd survived. As Marcus left the chambers, Dravik approached with an expression of barely contained fury. "This isn't over. We will be watching. And when you fail, because you will fail, those children will return to their proper place." "Their proper place is with someone who loves them," Marcus said. "Everything else is politics." 6 months after the council hearing, Marcus sat in the upgraded apartment that officially recognized guardianship had made possible. Not luxurious, but spacious enough for 5 children to have actual bedrooms and a living area that didn't feel like a storage closet. The transformation of both space and lives was profound. Liz was apprenticing with an engineering firm 3 days a week, her mechanical intuition making her invaluable despite her age. She'd solved a propulsion calibration problem that had stymied senior engineers for weeks, approaching it with an intuitive understanding of system relationships that couldn't be taught. Kento had discovered poetry. His perfect verbal memory combined with emotional sensitivity produced writing that was drawing attention from Keltheran literary circles. He'd been published twice in respected journals, his work praised for capturing experiences that older, more established poets couldn't access. The twins, Myra and Saul, were developing what mathematicians were calling a revolutionary spatial framework, a new approach to multidimensional problem-solving that emerged from their combined thinking. Universities were already inquiring about future educational opportunities. Pip remembered everything: conversations, observations, sensory details. Her brain cataloged information with perfect fidelity. She'd become the family chronicler, maintaining detailed accounts of their daily lives with the seriousness of an official historian. Saris visited at least twice a week, finally able to know her grandchildren. She and Marcus had developed an unlikely friendship, 2 people from different worlds united by believing children deserved advocates who saw potential rather than flaws. The harassment from Keltheran officials had decreased but not disappeared. Regular compliance checks meant government workers appeared periodically to inspect the living conditions, interview the children, assess Marcus's fitness. He'd learned to navigate these with professional courtesy while making clear that his guardianship wasn't negotiable. Ambassador Akoy, who'd warned him about fighting impossible battles, had quietly ensured that the worst legal threats didn't materialize. She'd never admitted to intervening, but Marcus noticed that paperwork challenging his guardianship seemed to get lost in bureaucratic systems, that hostile inquiries to his employer mysteriously stalled. Once, he'd thanked her. She'd given him a stern look and said, "I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm simply ensuring proper diplomatic procedures are followed." But her expression had suggested something almost like approval. One evening, as Marcus helped Pip practice reading while the others engaged in cheerful chaos about dinner choices, Liz approached with unusual seriousness. "Marcus, I need to tell you something." He looked up from the datapad where Pip was working through a story about Earth animals. "What's up?" In Keltheran culture, there is a ceremony. When children reach certain developmental milestones, They formally acknowledge their guardian in front of family and community. She paused, gathering words. We want to do that, all of us. We want to stand before witnesses and say that you are our guardian, that we choose this bond, that we honor what you've given us. Marcus felt his throat tighten. You don't have to. We want to. You saved us when we were being discarded. You fought the council when they tried to take us back. You've given us futures we weren't supposed to have. Her voice wavered slightly. You are Kelvasith, one who sees clearly, and we want everyone to know that we see you too. The ceremony took place 3 weeks later in the community hall of Marcus's residential district. It was a strange hybrid of Keltheran tradition and human adaptation, formal elements from ancient custom, combined with adjustments for a human guardian and mixed-species attendants. Saris presided as the eldest bloodline family member. The children stood together, dressed in formal robes that Marcus had nearly bankrupted himself purchasing. Friends from his workplace attended, along with neighbors who'd watched the family develop, and several Keltherans who'd expressed quiet support despite social pressure. Even Veles was there, the trade coordinator who'd first warned Marcus about the children's genetic significance. The ceremony involved each child discovering that being different could be powerful rather than shameful. Pip, barely able to reach the speaking podium, said simply, "Marcus sees us. We see Marcus. That's family." Then it was Marcus's turn. He stood before 5 children who'd become his entire world and tried to find words. 2 months ago, he stopped, corrected himself. 8 months ago, I was walking through a marketplace and heard someone offering useless children for free. I should have kept walking. I had no qualifications to be a guardian, no understanding of Keltheran culture, no plan beyond a vague sense that someone should help. But I looked at 5 terrified kids and saw people who deserved better. So I took you home, and you've been teaching me ever since. He paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm careful preparation. You've taught me that family isn't about biology or species or having everything figured out. It's about showing up every day and trying your best even when you don't know what you're doing. It's about seeing people for who they are rather than what systems say they should be. You've made me better than I was. You've given me purpose when I was just going through motions. So yes, I'm your guardian, but you've also become mine in ways I'm still understanding. The formal words followed, ancient Keltheran phrases about responsibility and honor and commitment that Saris had taught him to pronounce correctly. And then it was done. Official, witnessed, bound by both legal contract and something deeper than law. The celebration afterward involved food from 3 different worlds, music that didn't quite translate across species but created interesting harmony, and children running through the hall with the unself-conscious joy of people who'd learned they were allowed to take up space. Marcus found himself standing next to Ambassador Akoi, who'd arrived late and was observing the chaos with an expression that might have been approval. "You pulled it off," she said, "against all reasonable expectations." "I had a lot of help. You had stubbornness and a refusal to accept that some battles can't be won. That's not the worst diplomatic strategy, actually, though I'd never admit that publicly." She paused. "I've been monitoring the situation. Dravik's coalition is still looking for ways to challenge your guardianship. They won't give up easily. Neither will I." "Yes, I've noticed." Akoi's expression was almost warm. "For what it's worth, you've accomplished something significant here. You've forced an entire cultural system to acknowledge that their practices needed examination. That won't make you popular, but it might make you right." Later that night, after the guests had left and the children were asleep in their actual bedrooms in an actual home, Marcus stood on the balcony looking at Velix Prime's 3 moons and tried to process how much had changed. Saris found him there. "You should be celebrating, not brooding." "I'm not brooding, just thinking. About all the other kids. The ones still being given away, still being processed through systems, still waiting for someone to look at them and see value." He turned to face her. "What we did here, it worked for 5 children, but there are thousands more. Saris nodded slowly. You want to expand this? I want to try. Create a network of people willing to take in the useless ones. Provide resources, legal support, cultural guidance. Make it possible for more people to do what I did without having to fight the entire government system alone. That would be ambitious, expensive, politically complicated. But everything worthwhile is complicated. Saris smiled. You've learned well, very well. I can help. I have connections among old families who quietly disagree with current practices but lack the courage to oppose them publicly. And there are others, Keltharans who have watched what you accomplished and are reconsidering their own assumptions. So we have a chance. We have the beginning of a chance. Which is more than we had 8 months ago when a foolish human decided to bring home 5 children he couldn't afford and didn't know how to care for. Marcus laughed. When you put it that way, I sound like an idiot. You were an idiot, but sometimes the world needs foolish courage more than careful calculation. They stood together in companionable silence, planning a future neither had imagined possible. Inside, Liz appeared in the doorway. Marcus, Pip had a nightmare, she's asking for you. He headed inside, stopping briefly to squeeze Liz's shoulder. Thank you, for everything, for trusting me when you had no reason to. You gave us reason, Liz said simply. Every day you give us reason. Marcus went to comfort Pip, finding her tangled in blankets and crying softly. He sat on the edge of her bed, and she immediately attached herself to him with the fierce grip of a small child seeking safety. I dreamed we were back at the market, she whispered, that you walked away, that nobody took us home. But I didn't walk away, Marcus said gently. I looked again and I chose differently, and I'll keep choosing you every day, okay? That's not going to change. Promise, promise. She settled back into sleep, reassured. Marcus stayed until her breathing evened out, then checked on the other children, all sleeping peacefully in bedrooms that were theirs, in a home that was theirs, with a future that was theirs. He returned to the living room to find Sarah still there, having let herself in through the balcony door. You're good at this, she observed. Being a parent. It's not something that can be taught. Either you have the instinct to prioritize their needs over your comfort, or you don't. You do. I'm figuring it out as I go. All parents are. The difference is whether you care enough to keep trying when it's hard. You do. That's why this works. After Saris left, Marcus sat in his small living room, no longer too empty, now comfortably full, and allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, stubborn mercy could change the world. His datapad chimed with a message from Veles. Heard about your expansion plans. Count me in. I know 3 families who have quietly kept defective children hidden rather than discarding them. They need support and legal protection. Let's talk. Then another message from a Keltharan social worker he'd never met. You don't know me, but I've been watching your case. I work in the processing centers where discarded children go. There are so many more who need what you gave those 5. I want to help. And another from a human colleague. My partner and I have been talking about fostering. Seeing what you've accomplished made us think it might be possible. Can we talk about how to start? Marcus looked at the messages accumulating. People who'd been waiting for someone to prove that change was possible before they risked trying themselves. He pulled up a blank document and began drafting the framework for what he was tentatively calling the Guardian Network. Legal structures, funding sources, cultural education programs, support systems for families willing to take in children that societies had given up on. It was ambitious, probably impossible, but then again, 8 months ago, successfully raising 5 alien children he'd found in a marketplace had seemed impossible too. He worked until dawn, building the structure for something larger than himself, knowing that somewhere in processing centers and marketplaces across a dozen worlds, children were waiting for someone to look again and choose differently. And now, maybe, there would be more people willing to do exactly that. The sun rose over Velix Prime, and in the bedrooms of Marcus Webb's small apartment, 5 children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they'd been chosen, that they mattered, that they had futures worth protecting. It was